We're here in the Library of Congress with the Veterans History Project, interviewing Lieutenant General Julius Becton, U.S. Army, retired, someone who I had the good fortune of knowing back when we were at high school at Lower Merion outside Philadelphia. Could you tell us a word or two about your background and early times back in Lower Merion, where we both come from?
Sure. As you pointed out, I'm from suburban Philadelphia. Grew up in Bryn Mawr, which is not as rich as Narberth, where you went to school, or where you lived, I think. But went to Lower Merion High School, got there in 1941, graduated in 1944. But during that period, I had the ideal background growing up in a place that was very affluent. My father was a janitor at an apartment, and so I lived on the side of the railroad where you have Bryn Mawr College, Harcum Junior College, Baldwin School, Shipley School. All of those are part of the elite of the main line. But I went to Bryn Mawr Grammar School, and as you know, you cannot find the term grammar school in many places these days, and it did the job of teaching grammar the best way they could.
Well, now, tell me, if you can, how you happened to enlist in the Army and why the Air Corps and so forth. I think that's an unusual story, and
Sure.
Maybe you could recount it for us and your early days in the Army.
While at Lower Merion, I was a pre-med student. Excuse me, I wanted to be a pre-med, so I was a college prep student. I was also a member of the Civil Air Patrol because we could wear uniforms, and that was pretty snappy for those of us coming along. And General Haps Arnold came out to our high school one day in 1943. You may recall he was a former graduate of Lower Merion High School, one of our famous graduates. And he gave us a long pitch about joining the Army Air Corps, winning your silver wings and gold bars. And with that, I and many of my football players, fellow football players, took the series of examinations. And 6 of us joined the Army Air Corps enlisted reserves in December of 1943. I was a senior then, I graduated in June of 44, went on active duty in July of 44.
Tell us a little about your experience of that and how you then got into World War II.
Well, the war was going on at that time, and it was in 44, July, when I went on active duty. There were 6 of us at the time. 5 went to Florida for their pre-flight basic training. I went to Biloxi, Mississippi. As I many times said, a great place for a young black from suburban Philadelphia to go to, 18 years old. I said it with tongue in cheek. But I did not complete the program because I had astigmatism. Did not know that at the time. Well, I knew I had astigmatism, but I thought I could get by the examination. Matter of fact, I had gotten through several examinations. One of the things which I used to get by the eye portion, as you recall, they had charts in those days with great big E letter and then small letters and smaller letters. And then I was swift enough that I could take one glance at the chart and memorize it. And so when the examiner would ask you to cover your right eye and read, I had it done down perfect. One thing which I did not know, the new technology in 1944, they had a little machine. You go into a darkened room, you don't see anything, and then they cover your right eye and they punch a button, and the chart reflected on the wall, and I was caught. But anyhow, I failed the flight examination for eye test, and did finish the basic training, was sent off to an aviation engineer battalion down in Biloxi, MacDill Field, Florida. That is an interesting drill because, well, it's an aviation engineer battalion. All they do is put down PSP, pierced steel platform, for landing fields. and that is back-breaking work.
So what? How did you? What was your actual experience? How did you feel, and how did you then get more closer to the actual war front?
The one, I tried to find a way that I really wanted to get away from doing back-breaking work. I had a first sergeant, and by the way, this is an all-black unit. And my first sergeant was from the old school, been there a long time, but he was not that literate in reading. And one Friday afternoon, he came out to the formation and said, "Any of you boys type?" I had typing as a club at Lower Merion. Put my hand up. "Come in here." Okay, I went in, and that weekend I worked as his clerk typing. Then he said, "You're going to be my clerk." And one of the things I had to do was to read the roster to him so that he could stand in front of the formation and read the roster himself from memory, because the words and so forth. And we did quite well. I became very important to him. It wasn't shortly after I had that job, one of the lieutenants came in and said, "First Sergeant, there's a test going to be given on the main base. You might want to send Becton over there to go to OCS." First Sergeant said, "Good idea. Becton, you're going to go take that test." And so, yes, sir. I went over up here before the board. Another interesting fact, there were 5 people on the board. The senior member was a major who happened to have knew where Lower Merion was located. Now, Jim, you want to get a warm feeling. You're in a hot seat being asked questions all the way down here in Florida, and for a guy to understand he knows where you came from. That was very comforting. I passed the board. December of '44, I went off to Fort Benning, Georgia to attend OCS, Officer Candidate School. And because I did not have infantry basic training, we were sent to Anniston, Alabama for training to get us used to infantry weapons, and not the kind that the Air Force was using, the Army Air Corps was using. That was 6 weeks training, back to Fort Benning in January, and the Officer Candidate School started for me. In August of '45, I graduated. Now, I was 19 years old at that time when I graduated, and became a second lieutenant of infantry, 19, which is not the best thing for the Army, but you couldn't tell me that.
So then what was your subsequent service?
Well,
what's your commission?
Keeping in mind that the bomb was dropped in August of '45, I graduated in August of '45. A lot of us had some hang up that we might not even be commissioned because the war is going to be over. And it was over. The treaty was signed in September of '45. I was sent off to a place called Morotai in the Pacific. Morotai is a series of islands north of New Guinea, south of the Philippines. I joined the 93rd Infantry Unit, Infantry Division, all black division except for the senior officers. And I became the youngest lieutenant in the regiment, 369th Infantry Regiment. I was in Charlie Company. And that's where I spent the remainder of the post-war period, up until a point that the division deactivated. But let me go back for point out something else that happened to us. As the youngest lieutenant, I was selected, volunteered for all great jobs. Take that patrol up in the hill and see if you can find some Japanese. Sure.
Where was this? This was
Morotai.
okay.
And the Japanese had been on the island before. And yes, we found them because they shot at us. We came back and told our company commander, battalion commander, they sent the word to the regiment that they're there. And his answer came back, I'm told, leave them there. We'll starve them out. Okay. At the same time, I was, again, being a junior officer, we had 2 divisions on the island of Morotai. The 93rd Division and the Dixie Division. Now, if you can think of any more non-compatible units to have in the 40s, those were the 2. Dixie Division being all white with the title Dixie Division, 93rd being all black. I became a assistant MP officer riding in a Jeep with an officer from the Dixie Division. And our job was to ride around and throughout the area and make sure there were no inappropriate things taking place, no fights. The division deactivated in January of '46, and I was sent to the Philippines, to Manila as a signal officer. I joined the 542nd Signal Construction Battalion, Signal Construction Company, and I became a signal officer. I spent from that time, January until November, with that unit, and then was deactivated, came home.
Just reviewing that wartime service, your youth, there's these extraordinary juxtapositions that you were faced with within the Army, as well as facing the prospect of fighting the end game against an enemy. What were your feelings? Can you put yourself back in that period, just for a brief moment, about how did you feel about the war? What was your feeling about the experience?
First, I was a volunteer. I was not drafted. I was a 19-year-old lieutenant, and I realized that lieutenants should be a lot older. I had high school education. All the other lieutenants were West Pointers or ROTC or college of some kind. So I felt that I always had to do something to prove myself, that I was capable of doing what was required. As far as the war is concerned, hey, in those days, we had unconditional surrender, as I recall with the terms that were used. And we were out to do what had to be done.
Well, then you were out of the Army for a brief time, but then came back in '48. So could you tell us a little bit about why you came back?
Sure.
And then into the Korean War, which broke out not that long after that?
Sure. I went to Muhlenberg College on a football scholarship. The first black student to go to Muhlenberg, and I went on a football scholarship because my coach at Lower Marion had recommended me to the coach up at Muhlenberg. And I went up for a tryout. He was satisfied. I was accepted. Started school in February of '47. Pre-med student, football scholarship. And that football scholarship also afforded me, I think, $35 a month, in addition to the what was paid to the school, plus the GI Bill of Rights. So it didn't cost me anything. Pre-med student, worked very hard, but in the spring of '47, we had spring practice, and I injured myself, separated shoulder. And I had a choice of going through medical treatment for my shoulder and dropping out of school, and I decided football was not why I was there. I wanted to become a medical doctor. So I dropped the scholarship, which meant I didn't get the $35, but they were doing pretty good for the GI Bill of Rights. In '48, I was still in the reserves at that time, and I went back to active duty for reserve training. And in '48, I was at Aberdeen Proving Ground for summer training, 2 weeks. It was that same time that President Truman issued the Executive Order 9981, in effect desegregating the military, in theory. And since I really had enjoyed doing what I was doing in the Army, I was doing well in school, but I'd gotten married in January of '48, and we've later found out we were expecting our first child in December of '48. And the GI Bill of Rights, if you may have read about it, it was not all that plush in money, and I had to do something to take care of the family. We got together, wife and I, decided that I would be recalled to active duty. I reported to Washington, volunteered to be recalled, and in November of '48, I was recalled to active duty, but assigned to Fort Bliss, Texas. Now, my wife is in Philadelphia, and we're going to have a baby in December. I went back to the Army and said, can I have some other place to go to closer? And they said, sure. They sent me to Fort Monmouth for 30 days while the child was born. And then I went back down to Fort Bliss, Texas. The Army, in theory, was starting to desegregate. That was not the case at Fort Bliss. I went to an all-black battalion. I stayed there for about 6 months. I volunteered to be a competitive tour officer. The Army was looking for regular Army officers, and those officers who were not regular Army, who were reservists or National Guard, had a chance to compete against each other to be selected to be regular Army officers. And I was one of those persons that was selected. There were 1,000 taken each year. I was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training again. I was then sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, where now time moved up to 49. And I spent time with the 2nd Division in Fort Lewis. The war, before the Korean War started, after World War II started, had finished.
So tell me about how you became involved in Korea and what your feelings were, not only about that particular very unusual combat, very unusual war in terms of American history, but also about your feelings about the Army now that you were regular, and also that the Army was in the process, at least ostensibly, of integrating. So how did that affect your feelings, and what were your experiences there? If you could just talk about them during.
Well, I was not a regular Army officer at the time. I was competing to become a regular Army officer, and the unit had not desegregated. So in 49, I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, a 2nd Division. They had 2 black battalions at Fort Lewis, Washington, 1 artillery, 1 infantry. I was assigned to the infantry battalion, and the battalion commander, Hyman Y. Chase, black American, PhD, and we trained very hard before the Korean War started. The Korean War came about on the 25th day of June, 1950. The division was immediately alerted to go to Korea. I had been in my 2nd phase of my 1-year competitive tour, where they take, as I said, 1,000 officers throughout the Army, and there were 6 of us in our regiment, all competing against not each other, but against some standard. I was a platoon leader in 1 company. At the first quarter, we then transferred to another company. I'm in my 2nd quarter when the war started, and we should transfer again to another unit the 3rd quarter. That would have caused me and the rest of us to be going to a new unit at the same time we're going off to fight a war. The 6 of us got to see the regimental commander say, "Sir, can we do better in this?" And he agreed. Don't make any transfers. So the unit in which I was trained with, I went off to Korea. I'll point out that the battalion commander was changed a month before we took off. That bothered a lot of us because he had trained the battalion. He knew us. He was a black American. It was an all-black unit. And the person they were going to bring in was a white officer who had been in the battalion as a commander before. It so happened that the battalion commander had been on orders to be transferred to, of all places, Prairie View A&M College in Texas. I say all thing, can you recognize what that is? And it turned out that the Army had, because they had already made the decision, they would not change it. And they weren't too concerned about the fact they were bringing in someone else. So in 15th of July of 1950, my battalion shipped out, going to Korea. Interesting part of that, when the war started and we were alerted, we were short about a third of our company, and that was true throughout the entire regiment. And by the time we got on board ship, we had all the numbers we needed. And who were those replacements? They were cooks, truck drivers, people that came out of stockade, and these are the folk they gave us to go and fight. Not infantry trained people. So while we're en route to Korea, we actually trained as much as we could on ship. Physical fitness, yes. Rifleman marksmanship. We had orientation. They fired off the fantail of a ship with their M1s. That's what we had. They weren't the best people to get, but they were people, their bodies. And so with that background, we arrived into Pohang, which was in the Busan perimeter, the southern tip of Korea. The third week, latter part of the fourth week, July 1950. Because we were arriving with part of the division, our battalion was pulled out of the regiment and sent on a separate detail, which none of us could understand why. I later found out what the story was. And that story was the folks in MacArthur headquarters weren't too sure about the effectiveness of this black battalion. And they wanted to put us out to a place where we could be tested by providing airfield security and a few other things. We went on that mission, did well. The regiment caught hell. They took heavy fire. We were pulled back into the regiment, put into the line, and we were there when the efforts were to push out of the Busan perimeter to take the offensive. And that was in September when we moved out, September 1950, into actually engage in combat as part of the regiment. My company, L Company, we had good officers. I was the youngest, as I said, in every place else. All the officers had been in World War II as combat. I had not been in combat in World War II. But when it came time for things to take place, my platoon was always the lead platoon. And why? Because I know that the company commander felt that if he told me to do something, I would do it. His other company commander, his other lieutenants, he weren't too sure what they would do. They all were first lieutenants. And so that created a little problem too. And the company commander was not a captain yet. I was leading a patrol in September of 1950, and I ended up by being trapped between firefights of the North Koreans on one side, on our flank, another American unit who did not know who we were, so we could fire from them. And we could not get back into our lines because it would expose us, so I was stuck with my unit out in a sort of no man's land in valley.
Valley did they have the heights commanding, or where was the shooting?
Friendly units was on my right.
Yeah.
The enemy unit was in front of me, and we were trying to deal with that. We were effective and continued the attack. We didn't have much choice. We were able to do what had to be done. We took fire ourselves. We killed some enemy. I sustained a shrapnel wound myself. And we finally recovered, went back into our forces, and from then I went back into the medical chain.
And how long were you there? What happened subsequently?
Well, after my first wound, went back into the medical chain of Busan, and then off to Japan, Tokyo, Yokohama, Sendai. These are places in Japan where Army hospitals were located.
What was the wound? It was shrapnel.
Shrapnel, right thigh, and it was a clean wound. The sort of cut out a little chunk, and
then what happened after this?
Because of the wound, I was walking in a hospital. I was not bedridden, and the unit was doing very well. That is, the division and the entire U.S. forces, UN forces. And some of us wanted, hey, we heard that MacArthur said we were going to be home for Christmas, and we didn't want to be stuck in a hospital, so I volunteered to go back to the unit. That would put me back in the unit in the chain going back in October of 1950. I went up through the replacement system and ended up in the same battalion and joined.
Where were you then?
We were, that time, the unit was
moving-
north of the 38th parallel, and we were heading up into we were in North Korea. And you may recall from a history standpoint, there are people who had different views about where we should be doing this or not.
What was the feeling among the troops?
Hey, Jim, I was a soldier. I was a lieutenant. They say go, I went. I knew where we were, but I wasn't concerned about the politics of it. Keep in mind, I'm also being evaluated for a regular Army commission. I was still on that competitive tour.
Wow.
And it lasts for 1 year. The year started in January, so
what more criteria?
I had my wound. I was in good shape. I wanted to get back.
When you got back to the same unit, how was the morale?
Actually, I went back to the battalion, but to a different company. I went to I Company. I had been in L Company. I went back as a platoon leader and also the exec officer, because I now was except for the company commander, the senior lieutenant. Other guys have come in the meantime. And we were on patrols, as I said, going into North Korea.
This is mountainous terrain now?
Mountainous terrain, very mountainous terrain.
Okay.
And it's cold. We had one interesting situation. I was in the lead again of my unit, going up into high ground, and we had an adjacent unit from a 25th Division, 24th Infantry Regiment, which is the only other black regiment in that area, adjacent to us. I point that out because it becomes rather important when I went up the hill with my unit. We got shot at, took fire, and I was told, come back down. So we came back down, but that time the battalion commander was talking to the adjacent battalion commander who was making a reconnaissance, and I reported to the battalion commander what happened, and this guy from the next battalion was saying, from the 25th Division, I don't believe that, Lieutenant. There's no enemy up there. And I'm the guy who got shot at. And my battalion commander said, okay, Becton, go back up there. Went back up the hill, and I back down for an hour. This time I had a wound.
Where was this wound?
This wound was in the left ankle and the Achilles tendon area. It turned out to be a spent round that went between the bone and the tendon. Didn't touch either. And your knowledge of anatomy say that if either of those had been nicked, I would be crippled. That did not happen. I came back down from the hill. That battalion commander was still there, and I made a very inappropriate remark to him. Are you happy now? Pointing out there is somebody up there shooting at us. And my battalion commander said, go take care of yourself, Becton. And he told this guy something else, I don't know what it was. And I went back into the medical chain. I would point out that I have never been as cold as I was that day, or during that period, up in North Korea. We were, I guess, 20 miles from the river between China and North Korea. And when I got evacuated, that day, the next day, the Chinese hit our unit. And there are many books written about it, River and the Gauntlet being one of them, when the United States Army got kicked out of North Korea. I had been evacuated less than 24 hours before that. I've been flown back into Japan. My battalion that I was with lost most of our officers. I think there are 5 that escaped. The rest were captured or killed. And we lost a large number of people, as did the regiment and as did the division. You asked me what I think about the war then. I wasn't all that happy. I knew damn well we weren't going to be home for Christmas. And so we were evacuated. I was evacuated back to Japan through the same chain I went through before. I got up to a place called Sendai, and when I went in, this time I was not walking. The nurse took one look. Not you again. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. This is me again. This time I spent in the hospital from November of 50 until February of 51. The war was progressing. We got kicked out of North Korea, and we were dealing with the 38th parallel. The MacArthur had been replaced. We've gotten new commanders, and I will point out none of those things are of interest to a lieutenant when you deal with who's commanding the major effort. Time moves on. Now, March, I was sent back to Korea. The unit was south of the 38th parallel.
Now, was this the 3rd unit then?
Say again?
This is, what was this unit that you were attached with?
Same division.
Same division, okay.
Same regiment, same battalion. And when I reported into the regimental adjutant, the person in charge of administration and personnel, "Oh, I'm glad to see you, Becton." He's the same guy I'd known back in Fort Lewis. I said, "We got a job for you. We're going to put you as an assistant S3, assistant operations officer in the battalion because you had the experience that not many of those new guys had." And I was happy about that because this way I would not end up by being shot at again, not right away. As I'm making my way around the regimental headquarters, meeting people, there was a new regimental executive officer had been sent in from MacArthur's headquarters. It is rumored later that he was sent down to find out why the 9th Infantry sustained so many casualties when they were kicked out of North Korea, implying that because they were the integrated battalion with a lot of black soldiers, that was the problem, which was nonsense, but somebody thought that. This new executive officer was named Lieutenant Colonel Olinto M. Barsani. That's a name that became very important later on. The major skeleton, the adjutant, said, "Sir, this is one of our old officers. He's been shot a couple of times. Great combat record." And Barsani said, "He goes down to L Company." "But sir, we're going to put him back into operation." "He goes to L Company, Major." "Yes, sir." And I found out that L Company had lost all the officers. And when I reported in, there were some NCOs in charge, and I took command of the company. I stayed with that company as the company commander until I left, coming home. There was an interim period when they brought in some new replacements about April, and these had not been in Korea before, and one of them was a captain, and I was still a first lieutenant, so he took command of the company, but he basically said, "You do what we have to do." Battalion commander told him the same thing. But I stayed with L Company until I returned home in May of 1951. My war was over, but during that period, I was able to get a couple Purple Hearts. I was awarded the Silver Star, and I combat infantryman badge, and I had got a great deal of experience.
How would you cumulatively describe it as you left and came back to the States? What were your reflections on that experience? That's pretty intense.
As a historian, you know how the U.S. forces were treated when they got back from Korea. We weren't treated very kindly. And matter of fact, I had nothing untold happen to me, but I didn't wear a uniform that much when I was coming home. We had a home in Philadelphia. I was assigned to Fort Dix Training Center, which is 30-odd miles from Philadelphia, so I was able to get home. I was happy about that. And I'd been in Fort Dix for about less than a month in a completely integrated unit. I was a training officer, and we got orders. I got orders to go to Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, which I found out was nothing but the job I went to was to a battalion, all black battalion, and our job was to post police, clean up the post, provide a consolidated kitchen mess hall for all the people at the post, and do anything else that was, I say, degrading. An all black battalion, after I'd been in combat, done pretty well, came from Fort Dix, which was an integrated unit, and put in this black unit as basically a excess lieutenant. I was in that unit for about less than a couple weeks. I went to Washington and I said, hey guys, I don't know how I did for my regular Army commission, but I was not interested at that time. I wanted to get out of where I was. And they saw the situation, got it. And I was transferred to Indiantown Gap Military Reservation in Pennsylvania as a training officer. And that's where I spent the remainder of my time. In the early 50s, I was, during that period, I ended up by commanding a training company. And we were training incoming replacements. I was integrated into the regular Army, but been accepted through the competitive tour process.
Not until Indiantown Gap were you?
Yep.
So that was a little over the time limit, wasn't it?
Well, it takes time for the administration to work.
Okay.
You know, how fast is the administration and Library of Congress? We won't go there. But those things did happen. I also had a chance to participate in a couple of schools. I got a chance to meet a lot of people. And in 1953, I was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia to go to the advanced course. This is where they take captains and majors and get you ready for command and higher things. That was a good course program which lasted for 6 months. And in 1954, we graduated, and I went off to Germany. But during that period in 53, 54, we had our third daughter. I forgot to mention that our second daughter was born when I was in Korea. And I met some people who later had a lot to do with my life at Fort Benning. I was sent to Germany in 1954, April, joined the 2nd Armored Division in Mainz-Gonsenheim, Germany. I went in as a communication officer because while I had been at Indiantown Gap, I went to the communication course and picked up the skills of being a communication officer. I had that job at Mainz-Gonsenheim and Combat Command B for a year. I then took command of a company in the 42nd Armored Infantry Battalion. And this will be my third company I commanded. And I commanded that company for a year. And then I was sent to the Combat Command headquarters as an operations officer. So a year as a communication officer, a year as a company commander, a year as an operations officer. And I had a chance to meet a lot of very fine officers. And at that time, I convinced myself and my commander that I ought to become an armor officer and not infantry. They agreed, they recommended me, and I was transferred from infantry to armor. From the administration standpoint, I'd say typical guy on the street standpoint, it's no big deal. But it was for me. I just liked the way the armor operated in terms of concept of operations, in terms of what happened on the battlefield. It was in that position as the assistant operations officer at Combat Command headquarters, I was able to meet some people who later had a great deal to do with what happened to me. I stayed in Germany until 1957, And keep in mind, I still had not gotten that college degree. I was taking courses while I was in Germany, University of Maryland courses. And I was sent by the Army to go to Prairie View A&M College as an assistant professor of military science with the purpose of getting a degree. And you remember I said that would come back, Prairie View.
Yeah.
And Hyman White Chase had been a professor of military science, but he was no longer there. But he left a legacy that some people will never forget. I became an assistant professor of military science at Prairie View, in charge of MS3, that's the junior class of ROTC students. The class, first group in the advanced course of ROTC, the second group being MS4. I was also taking classes, so I ended up by teaching some of my students. At the same time, I'm a classmate of some of them in certain classes. And I was in something the Army called final semester plan. When you have one semester left, the Army will put you on complete class, no work. And while I was at Prairie View for 3 years, 2.5 years, I was assistant professor of military science and a student. My last semester, I was there as a full-time student. And I graduated from Prairie View as with my BS in mathematics. My wife, Louise, had completed her baccalaureate degree for nursing because she had a registered nurse status before. And so she ended up by graduating a year before I did and became, in fact, the acting dean of the College of Nursing because the dean went off to get her PhD. And Louise, being a non-typical student, but much older than the students, was able to help. I got my degree in 1960, as we jokingly said. I graduated in 60, she graduated in 59. Obviously, she's older than I am. That didn't go well, but I said it. So, I finished Prairie View with my degree in 60, went to France, and wrong. I went to Command General Staff College in 1960 at Leavenworth, which is the place for the middle level officers, captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels. Spent a year there in the Command General Staff College, and then I went to France in 61.
Well, taking the story up into the mid-60s, but in this period, it seems to me you had a family, Louise and the kids coming along. So you were having a variety of actual practical command experiences, and at the same time, additional schooling. Does anything, I would judge from what you said that maybe when you got into the armor side, that was a kind of a significant jump for you, or a significant, I mean, what in terms of your full later development do you look back on in that period as the kind of most decisive turning points for you personally in the Army, and also for the development of the Army as a better integrated institution?
While in France, I went to a logistical assignment, fourth logistical command. I'm now an armor officer, combat arms. I was trained at Fort Leavenworth in the Command General Staff College to be in a combat unit, making plans and operations and training, and now I'm stuck in a logistical assignment, which I really didn't appreciate. But I'm now a major, and I do what I'm told to do. The chief of staff of that unit was Joe Heiser, a colonel, later brigadier general, later lieutenant general, and became a personal friend in terms of helping me to overcome certain issues, problems, and he was a mentor of sort. While I was at logistical assignment, we stayed there until 1964. Actually 63. I returned home in December of 63 and attended the Armed Forces Staff College at Norfolk, Virginia. This is a first combined with the other services, that is Navy and Air Force, majors and lieutenant colonels. That was a month course. From there, I went to the Pentagon on assignment for the first time. During that interim period, I also went to jump school, parachute school. Now, I've been trying to become parachutist qualified from the time I was in officer candidate school, and I was denied for a variety of reasons. The first time, there was only one unit in the 40s that had black parachutists, and they were overstrength for officer personnel. And so when I applied for it, I was turned down. I applied again, and when I came back on active duty, and they didn't have any jump position for a signal officer because I came back as a signal corps officer. Now I'm leaving the Armed Forces Staff College, heading to the Pentagon, and I said, I want to go to jump school. Oh, you do? Sure, you can go to jump school. You're going to go to personnel. You can do that now. So I end up by going to Fort Benning, Georgia, jump school for 3 weeks. We reported in on the 4th of July. Now, have you been in Georgia in July in uniform? It's not very pleasant, but so be it. I got through jump school. And my dad, I was a student company commander because now I'm a major, I'm the senior officer, and that's an interesting situation too because the black hatters, that is the cadre, they want to make sure that they're in charge. And in jump school for 3 weeks, you are under the thumb of a black hat, a drill sergeant, no matter what your rank may be. And when it came time to doing push-ups, they made sure I did them properly. When it came time to jump out of an aircraft, they made sure I did that properly. But it was good training for me. Got through that to include being in Georgia in July. Went to the Pentagon in personnel. I was in the office of Assistant Chief of Staff of Personnel. And I went into an area of first dealing with the reserve components and later dealing with enlisted assignments, or listed promotions. Now a major is in 64, and then the President of United States, Johnson, wanted to have one of his military assistants to be a black American. And a lot of people were competing for the job. I was asked, would I be interested? By all means, sure, I'd like to do that. And my wife was not very happy about it, but she's a good supporter. And I was the Army's representative to become Johnson's military assistant. I was rejected because he later said that he wanted his Air Force II pilot, when he was the vice president, to be his senior military assistant. I had been promoted to lieutenant colonel when this came about, and his major, his Air Force pilot was a major promotable. On the list to be promoted, I'm already senior. So that took care of my being selected. The Army said, okay, we got another thing for you.
Now, why did that take care of you being selected? If you were higher ranked, you would think you'd be more qualified to claim it. But
the President of the United States said he wanted it.
see.
Any other questions, Doctor?
No.
Okay. So I went off to another course. The Army, the Department of Defense set up a course to train systems analysts. We had a person named McNamara who was providing the guidance for the Department of Defense. And we had, you recall, something called whiz kids.
Oh, yes.
Okay, well, we need the military need to have people competitive with those whiz kids. Mm-hmm. And so there were 32 of us selected in the first class, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. We were sent to IDA, Institute for Defense Analysis, who won the contract to train this group of people.
Now, where was that? This was
right across the street from the Pentagon.
Okay, right.
400 Army Navy Drive. Paperclip building is the one nickname it has.
Now, what was the attitude towards somebody with your degree of experience and professionalism in the Army suddenly seeing all these whiz kids moving in? I mean, was there a certain sense of competition there, or what was? Can you reconstruct how you felt about that, and then
Well, keep in mind now, I just been turned down for being the military assistant to the president. This was supposed to be a plus thing. And the Army was getting involved in something called Operations Research System Analysis. And I just finished my degree, which is in mathematics. And so I fit all the blocks because recent college work, combat experience, done fairly well, very well. And so I was selected as one of the 6 Army officers, and for a class of some 32 people. I might add, I was a senior Army officer, therefore the senior Army representative to the group. And that was probably the worst year of my life, because we covered basically in that 2.5 or 6 or 18-month period, a year of undergraduate, 4 years of undergraduate math and 1 year graduate math in one semester, if you can believe that. We were being pounded with mathematical, etc. And I struggled through it. I got through it, but it was burning a lot of midnight oil. The degree was granted by University of Maryland, and that was a MA in economics. Later, Rensselaer provided a year, and the program rotated around some of the schools. I don't believe Princeton was part of that program, but I graduated in '66, was assigned to the Chief of Staff for the Army's office as a manpower analyst. I've gone from being a young personnelist, now manpower analyst with a degree in economics and a representative of the Army for Operational Research System Analysis. That's where I was when I got an offer to join a unit that's heading off to Vietnam. Now, I've been trying to get assigned to Vietnam for some time, but because of a series of schools that had to fill certain boxes, I was not selected. I am now sitting in the Chief's office as an Operations Research Systems Analyst, and a call comes in from my branch, Armor Branch. Hey, Becton, how would you like to join a unit that's heading off to Vietnam? Airborne unit. Keep in mind, I'm also airborne qualified. And it turned out that the person they offered the job to first was in G3, or DESOPS, in the Army. And he had completed about 30 months of his assignment. And because he had not completed 36 months, he did not have a full assignment as such, and his boss would not release him. I'm sitting over in the Chief's office with less than a year, and I was offered a job, and my boss said, sure, you can go if you get a replacement. And that was, couldn't ask for anything better than that. I was selected to go to command a Armored Cav Squadron in the 101st Airborne Division. The division commander is the one who made the final decision. His name was O.M. Barsanti. Same name, who had been the exec of a regiment that said, you're going to go command that company, and now accepted me as a commander for a very important assignment. I left the Pentagon in 1967, joined the 101st Airborne Division, took command of this Cav Squadron. I became the first battalion commander equivalent Black American to command a unit in the 101st. We're going to go off to war shortly in about a 6-month period. We had a chance to select our officers, select our key NCOs, and train to go into battle. You can't go into battle much better prepared than that. We did those things. My wife, family did not move to Campbell. They stayed in Washington, and I was on geographical bachelor for all practical purposes. But when we were trained, we didn't have much time for family anyhow. It was there that I really had a chance to understand what cavalry was all about and what I had to do. Keep in mind, I had never been in a cavalry unit before. I had never been in an airborne unit before, except for 5 jumps qualified. And I had never been in an airborne division before, and I was selected to do those things, which raised a lot of questions. Why is this guy here? And so quite frankly, I was under the gun for about a couple of months to prove that I could do what had to be done. Anyhow, we deployed to Vietnam in December of 1967. We were there when Tet took place in 1968. We were very effective in fighting the enemy where we were located. After Tet, we were deployed from the central part of Vietnam to North Vietnam, to outside of Hue, the capital of the northern region. And I spent the remainder of my 6 months in command up in that area. The Army had a policy then that you could only command for a 6-month period in combat. For some theory, you might be burned out, which I think is baloney, because you got soldiers there, and so why would I burn out more so than the soldiers? Anyhow, that was the policy of the Army, so I was moved out of that squadron and sent back down to a place called Cu Chi to become the executive officer for 3rd Brigade, 101st Division, which was back there as support of the 25th Division. We left that unit, the 25th Division, and rejoined the division up north in what would have been July of 1968. And I spent the rest of my time in country, Vietnam, before rotating out in November up north. We had quite a few battles. We had, during this period, I had one soldier who earned the Medal of Honor. We earned in the unit squadron all the awards you could earn for a unit. We did very, very well. And I'm very proud of that unit because that was 1967 when I left that unit, or 68 when I left that unit. And every 2 years since then, we've had a reunion. We just had a reunion last month of my unit from Vietnam.
Well, now, could you sort of explain what was unique about it from the point of view of somebody on the front lines fighting there, as distinct, say, from Korea beforehand? And, and to what extent were you aware of all the turmoil that was going on at home about all this, and what was your feeling about that?
Obviously, much more senior as a lieutenant colonel than I was as a lieutenant. A lot more aware of what was going on at home. I was in command of the squadron when Martin Luther King was killed, and people were very concerned that we might have an uprising or something. And we had a memorial service in honor of him, and then we went back to work. We had no problems with that at all. We had some humorous things that happened from a political standpoint. About a month before I left my squadron, I had a reporter from Chicago sent to me by division. He wanted to find out how this black commander was doing because I was still the only black commander, battalion commander in the division. And he wanted to find out what's going on. So he came in. Can I help you? Sure, I want to talk to your soldier. Go talk to him. You gonna go with me? No, I'm not gonna go with you. You can provide somebody for me? No, unless you need some help. And so he spent about 12 hours with our unit. And then he went back to Saigon or someplace. And would you believe I never heard another word about what he found out or what he was told? Nothing was printed about it. I discovered, came in with an agenda. He wanted to prove that things were not going to work well in this organization. And that was not the case. We did well. The other aspect, we were very effective in how we operated. I was the only armor unit in the division, and a very senior officer was the deputy commander of McVie, military headquarters in Saigon. Creighton Abrams, 4-star. When he would come out to the field, he used to visit us but once a week, just to sit down and talk. He's an armored officer, and I'm got an armored unit. And if I had a godfather, he later became that godfather. Godfather in terms of making sure that certain things happen. But we did a good job, and we were recognized for that job, and we received a unit citation for what we did as combatant forces.
What were your most memorable experiences in Vietnam, and how do you look back on it now, 40 years later?
I had a maintenance warrant, warrant officer in charge of maintenance of our vehicles. Well, we didn't have a lot of vehicles because in an airborne unit, we got jeeps, and that's how we were fighting, not like with tanks. And before we moved up north, he had approached me and said, if I could, would he accept the fact that we could get some personnel carriers, armored personnel carriers, which were not authorized for the division, because we're an airborne unit, they don't jump out planes very well. And I said, if you can do that without either of us going to jail, please do. All of a sudden, he went out and found 6 personnel carriers, armored personnel carriers. 5 diesel, 1 gas. I later found out he went down to a local depot where the Vietnamese army was located, and they had a lot of equipment around. And he was able to talk them out, 6 of them. I think maybe a couple of Scotches may have made it work, but I didn't pursue that. Those personnel carriers became our fighting force. It's something which the Vietnamese had not fought before, that is the North Vietnamese. We made sure they knew who we were. We painted the most ferocious looking eagle on the front of that personnel carrier, on each of them. We equipped them for combat operations, not just to carry people. We equipped them with machine guns on top, 50 calibers, and sides for firing 50 caliber weapons. And during that period, we never lost a personnel carrier, even though they got shot at by a lot of people. They have RPG holes in them, but those guys were not going to let anything stop them. And they were very effective. I could not have been more proud of the unit, what they did, and the men who worked with them. As mentioned, we had 1 Medal of Honor winner. We had a couple of Distinguished Service Cross winners, to include one of my company troop commanders. We had, there were no parachute, no jumping during those days, but we had the spirit of CAV and the spirit of airborne. You combine those two things, you become almost untouchable. At least we thought we were anyhow.
And what about retrospective, looking back on it? What are there any sort of thoughts? You've had a lot of experiences since then as well.
My experience in Vietnam qualified me for some very positive things. One, I was selected to be promoted to colonel. 2, I was selected to go to the Senior Service College, in this case, the National War College over at McNair. And 3, the Chief of Staff selected me to become the military assistant to Nixon. Now, my second time to be selected for that position. And I said, sir, if you tell me to do that, I'll do it. But if you ask me where I want to do it, I'd much rather go to Senior Service College, War College, because I'm getting further and further behind the age group that goes off to the War College. And General Palmer, Bruce Palmer, who was the acting Chief of Staff, said, right, forget about it. And so I escaped another opportunity to work at the White House, which again made my wife very happy. I guess if I were able to just to put it into a nutshell, I did it as well as I possibly could do during that 13 months in combat with the 101st Airborne Division in order to get the things that happened to me later on.
So when you got back from Vietnam, you did the War College. How did that experience differ from apart from being at a somewhat more higher level and so on?
Well, the National War College is I describe it this way. All war colleges are equal. Army, Navy, Air. You had the Industrial College of the Armed Forces and the National War College. But I would say all war colleges are equal except National is more equal than the rest of them. I say that because they have a record of having more ambassadors, because we have State Department people, more admirals and more generals graduate from those who have gone to that school than any other school. I was sent to the National War College. I left there and went as a brigade commander, now higher level, at Fort Hood, Texas, 2nd Armored Division, same division I was in when I was in Germany, and now I'm brigade commander. Matter of fact, the same unit I was in, same regiment or combat command. And we did very well at Fort Hood. At the end of my command tour, the Corps commander wanted to keep me on his staff to deal with what then was a bubbling up unhappiness, racially speaking. You had a lot of unhappy soldiers coming back from the war who were draftees and wanted to get out. And he wanted to use me in that position. I was happy about that because with the family would stay there a little bit longer. And right before I was able to give up my command and go to that job, another call from Washington come in. Becton, you're coming back to Washington. Why? One, because we said so, but two, we got a job for you. It turned out to be in charge of all armor officers, in charge of the assignment of all armor officers, as the chief of personnel, chief of armor, and Office of Personnel Directorate. Now, that may not sound much, but remember, I'm not an armor graduate. I transferred to armor. I didn't have a lot of experience in armor as such, and now I'm going to be in charge of all the assignments. Now, some people took unhappiness, were not very happy about that, to include a person who I ran across a couple of times, George Patton. He was now the assistant commandant at the armor school, and in charge of the assignment, or in charge of training, education of armor officers, lieutenant, captains, majors, and some lieutenant colonels. One of the things that we used to do as a branch chief would be to invite it to the school to talk to the officers. General Patton would not do that for me. He felt that it's a damn shame that my branch chief is not a graduate of armor. I said, sir, you can take care of that. Give me an honorary degree. And he didn't take kindness to that. Anyhow, George now moves on. And in comes Bo Williams, who is now the assistant commandant. I, in the meantime, get promoted to brigadier general. I'm now sitting at Fort Dix. And Bo asked me would I come out and speak to the school, the students at Knox. Sure, 2 conditions. One, I want an honorary, one condition, I want an honorary I want an honorary degree of completion of the course. You got it. He said, oh, by the way, we'll make you also an honorary faculty member too. Super. I went out to Fort Knox, talked to the students, came back to Fort Dix, and I sent a fax to George Patton with the copy of the certificate, am I qualified now? Of course, he didn't answer that, but I just felt I should do that. Time moves on. Deputy Commander of Fort Dix. I met a lot of great people. I get promoted to 2 stars, Major General, and by that you expect I get another assignment. Post Commander is a Major General, so you got 2 Major Generals on a place where you only need 1. And he was not very happy that I'm still around. I've been there much longer than he had been there. And I later found out that I'd been selected to command a division. 1st CAD Division, Fort Hood, Texas. And the guy who made the selection, Abrams. I mentioned that he had been one of my mentors. But then he died in August of '74, and in come a new commander. I'm still at Fort Dix. I don't take command until December. And the Chief of Staff made this new Chief of Staff said, well, if Abe said that Becton gets command, Becton gets the command. So I take off for Fort Hood in December of 1974, take command 1975. In the meantime, my raider, my boss at Fort Dix, was not very happy about my assignment, and he reflected that unhappiness in my efficiency report. Of the 10 areas in which I was evaluated, from everything from public speaking, community activity, et cetera, he said, I did all those things well except for training soldiers. I didn't pay enough attention. Now, a division commander, that's the last thing you need to be told, you didn't train soldiers well. When that report got to Washington, I'm down at Fort Hood, already in command. The Chief of Staff comes down to Fort Hood, spend 3 days there. I did not know why, except 2 divisions there came to look at training. I found out from my boss down at Fort Hood that he came down for one reason, just to see how well Becton was doing, because he may have made a mistake by putting me in command when I had that kind of report card. He was happy what he saw. That report never came up again, and I commanded the 1st Cavalry Division for 18 months. We did some pretty good things, a lot of fun, and I went from there to Washington again, command something called the Operations Test and Evaluation Agency. We're in charge of all testing of new equipment in the hands of soldiers before it becomes adopted. Another fairly important activity. A Joe Heiser, name I mentioned again, was still around, and he supported that move for me. I spent 2 years in Otia, which is out Bailey's Crossroad here in Washington, and was selected for a promotion to Lieutenant General. And now I'm going to command the biggest unit the Army has. In September of '78, I moved from Washington to Stuttgart, Germany as commander of the 7th Corps. The largest corps the Army has, the most combat-ready unit the Army had, in charge of all of southern Germany. Who's my commander? Deputy Commander George Patton. I didn't mention the fact that when I was the commander of the 1st Cav Division, George came in later as the commander of the 2nd Armored Division, and we got along quite well. And then he went off to become Deputy Commander of 7th Corps, and I went to Otia. So now I'm coming in as the commander of 7th Corps, and George had every expectation that he would be the commander of the division, of the Corps. It turned out not to be the case, but he had expected that. But we got along quite well. When I reported in October of '78, General Patton came in and said, you know, we've had some difference of opinion, but I'll do whatever you want me to do. Thank you, George. Appreciate that. I just want you to do what you know what has to be done. Roger that, and we got along well. About a month later, he came in and said, you know, I've tried, but I think that I'd like to get retransferred. Sure. I told my boss, George Blanchard, that Heidelberg, the USAR commander, United States Army Europe commander, that Patton wanted to leave. Sure, let him go. So he got orders to be assigned to Army Material Command here in Northern Virginia. He sent his family home right before Christmas, and he stayed on because we had a Reforge exercise coming up in February. Reforger is acronym for Return of Forces to Germany, which is the largest exercise that you can have in Europe at that time. It was the core exercise. I was the exercise director and also in charge of the 7th Corps troops. George was doing his thing as the deputy commander. At the end of that operation, George came back in and said, you know, I like the way you operate. I want to stay here. Fine. I called my boss, George Blanchard. George want to stay here. Hell no, he got to go home. Okay, General Patton went home. But during that period, we were able to prove that we both were soldiers. And I'll tell you that if I'm on a road to Moscow at that time, I had a couple folk who were really could create problems from other people's standpoint. My regimental commander, cavalry regimental commander covering force, a Major General Bob Wagner, then Colonel Bob Wagner, and George Patton, my deputy. If I'm on the road to Moscow, I want those two guys with me because they were that good. But it turned out we didn't have to go to Moscow, and they couldn't be there anyhow. So, Lieutenant General in 7th Corps, first Black American to be a lieutenant, to be a Corps commander, had the largest forces of anyone. The Chancellor of Germany, I'm later told, was not very happy about a Black American coming in charge of such a large piece of the real estate. I'd been there probably less than 3 or 4 months, and I got word that he couldn't be happier in that short period through his spies, whatever you want to call them. The mayor of Stuttgart, Oberbürgermeister,
Okay. Well, now tell me just quickly on this last period.
Who the hell's the mayor?
Rommel.
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 Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's the first mental blank I had during this period. By the way, I'm older than he is. I'm 84, so I have an excuse for having it.
Now, this was the Cold War period still.
Cold War period.
Pretty strong.
Very strong.
Pretty strong. So how did you're at a much higher level of command now, really,
Yep.
but at the same time on the front lines, not just preparing for things. There was always a constant possibilities there. How did your feelings about the Cold War differ from your feelings about the 3 hot wars that you were in?
Okay.
And then I have one more question beyond that, but go ahead with
Let
that
me
one.
pick up 1 second when I had that mental blank, because it's important that Rommel, who was the Oberbürgermeister, upper mayor, had a great relationship with the Army, with us. And we became very close personal friends. Even to this date, he's now suffering from quite a few things happening to him, Parkinson being one of them. But we still exchange Christmas cards and letters. And you may remember at a birthday party, there was a videotape made, and he had participated in that videotape.
Yep.
By the way, the person who produced that tape was a Patton, the youngest member of the family.
Yes.
I only mention those things in passing.
Wow.
But okay, how did the Cold War differ from the other hot wars? We had first to take care of our own real estate. We were basically operating in the mud. Our motor pools were not cemented, not prepared well, and we had to overcome that. The administration that took the change at the end of 80 brought in the 1980, in the 1980, brought in money, and we got a lot of money to refurbish what we're doing. We also had a lot of time to train our soldiers, to go out in the field, and we trained very hard. I had a great Air Force counterpart because the Army and Air Force had to work together. The commander of my counterpart was a Lieutenant General Earl Brown. I say that because here we have a situation in Europe where the major ground commander is a Black American. His counterpart, Air Force, is a Black American. When we went to the field, he brought his headquarters out to the field too, which was not expected, but he wanted to make sure that we were able to get things done if we had to. And our staff got along very, very well. And I'm only mentioning this being Black American for another reason. I've been in command for about 10 months, and my staff judge advocate came in and see me. My Secretary General Staff came in to see me one day and said, "Sir, I think you're going to like what I'm going to tell you." "What's that?" "You're no longer a Black Corps commander." "What do you mean I'm no longer a Black Corps commander? Look at me." I said, "No. The public affairs officer brought in a piece of paper and showed me that for the last 9 months, whenever the German press wrote about you, they had a Black Corps commander. Now they just said a Corps commander." Minor point, but a very significant point. I go back to my comment about the chancellor being concerned about the community, being concerned about the relationship with Rommel. We were able to do the kinds of things that I felt were very important. We also, on the distaff side, the family side, we took the lead in dealing with our women, be they soldiers, family members, employees, whatever. And note, I did not use the term dependent. I said the family members, because we were the ones that started getting a change of terminology from being dependent to being a family member. That may not mean much to many folk here, but for, like my wife said, I'm not dependent on you. I understand that. I'm a family member. Got it. And so we started. And as Bob will tell you, that term is used throughout the military now, except for in law where the code talks about dependent. That must stay, but everything else is family member. We did some great things. That program about family symposia got a start back here after we did it in the 7th Corps. I had some outstanding soldiers. At least 6 of my colonels then ended up by being 4-star generals. So that tells you, give you an idea of what kind of talent we had. Felt very good about what we did. We were prepared to go to war if we had to. And we wanted to make sure the Germans knew we were prepared to go to war. They did.
Tell me about your retirement and how you look back on this remarkable career in the Army and the impact for you and for America.
I retired in August of 1983. I was the Deputy Commander of Training and Doctrine Command. That is in charge of all training, officer enlisted, all doctrine, concept. Is a large share of the Army's getting prepared to go to war. I was also the Army Inspector of Training. The Army had an Inspector of Training in 1776. And the Chief of Staff thought, Scheimeyer, we ought to do something like that. So he appointed me as dual-hatted Deputy Commander and the Army Inspector of Training, which gave me an opportunity to actually be an evaluator of everything in the Army, to include evaluating myself, how well we were doing in training. And so we did that too. But during that period, I got a chance to meet a lot of people that were very important to us later on. Near my retirement date, I had decided I did not want a retirement parade. I'd seen too many of those, and I just felt I didn't want to go through that. And I let it be known. Would make my staff very unhappy. It made the TRADOC commander, Training Doctrine Command commander, unhappy too. And I was convinced that the retirement was not for me, for all the soldiers who I had worked with that may want to participate, etc. Okay, fine. And I said, okay, there'll be no tear-jerking presentations to my staff. Got it. Well, along come my retirement date, 23rd of August, 1983. I'm out there, I give a great speech, so I say. But in the audience, we had 30-odd general officers who had traveled for the retirement parade. And as my memory, if not faulty, we had every black general officer except one traveled there. It was in the audience. Major Colin Powell was sitting in the second row. I felt very, very good about that kind of support. The other thing, which my staff did to me, which I was not prepared for, as we're lining up to have the trooping of the line, that is soldiers marching by, band playing, at Fort Monroe there's a gazebo at the parade ground. And after the band had passed and they the band was playing the songs of retirees. There were 4 retirees, by the way. I said, if I'm going to retire, I want a normal retirement. So they had 4 generals, 4 colonels. 1 general, other general, 2 colonels. And each of us had our selected song. And after that was done, it was announced that one other thing, please focus on the gazebo. And from behind the gazebo came a series of soldiers carrying the colors of the unit that I had served with, starting with the flagpole L Company, 9th Infantry, 2nd Infantry Division. We had my squadron colors, 2nd and 17th Cavalry, Combat Command colors. We had soldiers from Fort Hood carrying the 1st Cav colors with the typical attire, including the black Stetson. And we had troopers from 7th Corps. Now, even when I think about that, I get emotional because it was just, when you think about that there is your entire Army story right in front of you. And they all came up online, stood, they saluted. And I say you get emotional when you think about that. I got emotional then. So did Louise. We were both standing out there. That gave me a pretty good indication of what some people thought. Okay, time moves on. I had 4 jobs after leaving the Army. Interesting enough, the first 2, I was working for the government as the Director of Foreign Disaster Assistance and Agency for International Development. And because I was working for the government, I was on a dual compensation. You may remember at one time you could not draw retired pay and also government pay at the same time. So for that period, I worked basically with no increase in pay. But I wanted the job. I wanted to do the job. And you heard why I went to the first job. I won't repeat that. But you remember I was trying to help my wife. I reorganized the kitchen. I decided I won't do that. I went to work. So from Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, Director of FEMA for 3 years, Prairie View A&M University as the president for 5 years. And the last job I had, as I've said many times, the most difficult job in my life, Superintendent of District of Columbia Public Schools. Why was it difficult? Because in this city, no good deed goes unpunished. And you have people who think they're in charge, and they've had more superintendents in the District of Columbia than any other urban area that I know of. As a matter of fact, as you may know, just recently, the last superintendent, Michelle Reed, just left. It's a very challenging position. And I didn't have a problem with the unions, but I had a problem with a judge. And I would just recommend anybody want a real story, read my autobiography. I can put that in, can I? Anyhow, read the autobiography. It tells a story there. But those were the 4 jobs I had. I think what I did in the Army prepared me for those kinds of jobs, because not to teach me to lead soldiers in combat, but teach me how to be a manager, how to deal with people. Okay, those were the things which, if I had to pride myself in anything, I think that's it. I understand how to get along with people. I even had a chance during that period I was asked by the Librarian of Congress, would I like to come over here and do something over here? And I think I told him no, but I was able to help him select his deputy.
I guess a retrospective question about your really unique pathfinding career is something of great pride to the old school and to anybody who's known you at any stage along in your remarkable career. What broader points could you make about leadership? You've obviously had that capacity in a variety of different ways, both in the Army and later in civilian life. What What are the lessons that you've learned about leadership and about the development of America? I mean, the Army, military forces, in many ways, ahead of the country as a whole, because people have a clear set of objectives and a clear structure of how you measure accomplishment and things of that kind. What broader lessons does America need to learn when you have a situation now where so many people in leadership have had no experience with the military experience at all? So what broader lessons for our society would you draw from that experience?
Jim, over the period of wearing a uniform, I developed a certain philosophy of command. And there were 12 points that I use. Be professional. Integrity is non-negotiable. Chain of command works if you use it. Innovate, seek a better way. Admit mistakes. 4 things. First, conservation is everybody's business. Then I added to that, conservation and security is everybody's business. I ended up with conservation, security, education, and one other which passed right now is everybody's business. Disagreement and not disrespect. Be sensitive to and intolerant of abuse and misuse of your people. Chain of command works, excuse me, I've had that, but keep things in perspective and maintain a sense of humor. Those 12. And I have used them every place I've gone, whether I'm talking to soldiers, whether I'm talking to the people in the building, Pentagon, where I've used them at commencements, because I think you can change them around, rephrase them any way you want, but to me it helps. If I were a new person coming in and my boss told me this is what he believes, that tells me what I have to do. Too many of us go to work for people and we never know what the boss expects, other than just do the job that you're required to do. But what does he expect of you as an individual, as a human being? Mm-hmm. And I'm able to use that, and very effectively, I think. It has been very helpful to me in all 5 jobs, Army and the jobs I've had since the Army. I've been fortunate enough to get 5 honorary degrees, doctorates, and what some of the things I've done are reflected in what they stated I did. I have an appreciation for people, which I think is very important. If I had to pick the most important of those 12 items, I would pick the second one, integrity. Is non-negotiable, because nothing more important to me, I think, to anyone else than their integrity, because once you lose it, you're in trouble. And I added a 13th one when I went to the District of Columbia Public Schools. Children first. And that's my bread and butter. My kids use it. Our Air Force Colonel daughter, who's retired, used it, and her job. Even my wife used a couple of those points, because we all help to make that happen, and we all work to make it appropriate.
Well, Julius, I just have to say at the conclusion that on every front, as a military commander, as a leader, as an inspiring of other people who have been called on to lead in various ways, as a family man, as an American, you're a kind of hero. And I hope you know it, and I think the secret to it all is how you relate to people. Could you say just a last word about that, because that really is something magic that has earned you the admiration, the affection, and the appreciation of more people than have ever said thank you to you, even people you've just touched slightly. So I know it's embarrassing to have to talk about yourself, but how is it that you have got this special magic with people as well as a sense of command?
Well, because you got to deal with people, and as simple as that. Yeah. This fellow sitting over here, I never knew who Bob Patrick was until I was in the Army. I didn't know, but I went to work for the American Battle Monument Commission, and we were the ones that were in charge when the World War II Memorial was built, and he was intimately involved. And you didn't know who Bob Patrick was back when that was being put up. I don't think you did.
No?
But I mentioned it to a fellow named Don Scott, and Don Scott said, you need a person, and so he's here. We had a person, P.X. Kelly was in here. We had lunch together.
Oh, yeah.
P.X. Commandant of the Marine Corps. Why would a soldier meet a Commandant of the Marine Corps? Well, we were on a couple of boards together, and then we got to know each other quite well, and are friends to this day. And I'm fortunate enough to meet people. I am fortunate enough to meet people like that, and recognize that, hey, we can help each other. I've worked with 4 Commandant of Marine Corps, and because of jobs, because of boards, number one, and because we're talking about people. And as long as we deal with each other as people, I think we can make things happen. When I put that one in about admit mistakes, if you think back to some of our previous administrations, they were accused of not admitting a mistake was made. And when you stand up in front of a group of people and say, hey, one of our problems is we don't admit mistakes, right? I think I can say it. It's my philosophy. And if someone wants to take it personally, that's their problem, not mine. I feel as though that if I can look myself in the mirror in the morning when I shave and recognize that, hey, you got some shortcomings, you got some things that work pretty well, but as long as I feel pretty good that I can look at him in the morning or go to bed at night, I'm not going to stay awake twisting and turning because of something I've done ill to persons. I just try not to do that. And I got 5 great kids and a superb wife of 62 years, I might add. So we're talking about the family. 11 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. And on a great-grandchild stat, I have a great-grandson who's taller than you. He's 6'8". So, and he's 21. And yes, he plays basketball. So we cover the spectrum.
Thank you, General Becton.
Thank you, Dr. Billington.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.